is, for want of a better term, is a receiving clerk for the tomatoes, which started coming in much earlier than they were ripe here. They ripened on the lower part of the eastern shore, and we received tomatoes up from down the eastern shore of Virginia, Salisbury, you know, up and work its way up, peak, well, around whatever time, around this time, and then later on, as things were dying out here, New Jersey was just coming in, so you get tomatoes in from New Jersey.
Right.
Now, most of the corn, I had little to do with that, but most of the corn, if not all, it was grown here in Queen Anne's County.
Very interesting.
Yeah. But they were the two big ones. Now, back in the 30s, there were a couple of large canneries. I'm not sure I ever knew about them operating, but I may have. But you know, I don't have a vivid memory.
Sure.
In Centerville, that went out of business. Can't remember the names now, but they were owned by outfits in Baltimore, I think. But almost there were canneries all over the place. You know, tomatoes, corn, basically. I guess other ones, Phillips down in Cambridge was a big producer. Other ones around. Now, that was a source of employment during the summer for watermen who didn't want to crab, or for some reason or other,
or didn't have maybe carpentry skills, or those kind of things.
Yeah. The other thing that's kind of vivid as far as local employment was concerned is every little town, and I found this true as I went out and worked in Western Maryland, had a sewing factory. Called it the shirt factory, but they sewed other things. It were, I think probably the best way of saying it, subcontractors to large clothing manufacturing. Baltimore was a big center for manufacturing clothing, or, you know, I guess sewing clothing.
Sure.
But that was a source of employment for women, not so much for men in the sewing factory, but they, single women, widows, sometimes just as an added needed income, but every little town had a sewing.
Where were they here locally, or where?
There's one right in the middle of Graysonville. I think it's an antique store now, if I'm not mistaken. It's up directly opposite, almost directly opposite to the Methodist Church.
Right.
Now.
And that was open for a lot of years, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, yes. It was open, well, all through the 30s, and I think they had downtime.
Right.
Every business did. Through the 40s, well into the 50s, maybe into the 60s. I'm not sure about how, but, well, certainly into the 50s, because yeah, a good many years.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how long. I don't know whether it was open in the 20s.
Sure.
I have no idea.
Sure.
I suspect it
when
might
it was
have
established
been.
or something like that.
Yeah. You touched on something. Most of the watermen had other skills, carpentry, painting, not so much plumbing, I guess. Plumbing wasn't very prevalent in Graysonville in the 30s and early 40s. A good many of the watermen both oystered and crabbed, and they were the two big things. There were not much commercial fishing. I won't say there was none. Commercial seine haulers, there was a family, the Shellbergs in Queenstown, who were commercial seine haulers. And then there were some in Rock Hall, what have you, and there were a few net fishermen, fixed net fishermen that did that. But my point was that those who didn't want to go crabbing generally look for a painting job, a carpentry job, or something of that nature. A lot of times they would go over to the Western Shore, Baltimore, that area.
And leave as soon as oyster season started.
Right. Oh yeah. When oyster season came on, they came back. They'd leave a good paying job and come back to go oystering. And my father, who was a jokester, always told a joke about the guy, and you have to know what a culling board is, oystering, but it's a simple piece of carpentry, and it came back and hired somebody to build him a culling board. I can't remember who that was, but that was one of his stories. I'm doing a lot of talking.
One thing I wanted to make sure we touch on before we wind things up, you're going to your high school reunion tonight.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the interviews that I've done over the years, I've found that a lot of young men didn't graduate. Was education particularly important in your family, or?
Very important. Neither my father nor mother were what you call well educated by even those standards. I don't know how long they went to school, but I'm sure my mother was the oldest of a household of Catholic children that had to be taken care of, and so she, I'm sure, didn't get until she went to work in Baltimore.
Right.
Daddy, I don't know what he did, but I'm sure he didn't go to school all that amount, but they were voracious readers. We always got two daily newspapers, the Sun and the News Post, or whatever it was. As long as I can remember, as long as that was in business, that was a must. You got the county paper, you got some other papers. We had books in the house, not great libraries certainly. One thing I guess I'm sort of proud of, we had a set of encyclopedia. Now, some of this is going back to being in the store business, that somebody would come by selling things. Well, you could buy that at a discount, so you could get it. But we were readers. We were encouraged to study, go to school. I was the first one to get a college degree. My younger sister also got a college degree. My two older sisters all had some post-high school education. Carolyn went to secretarial school, and Mary Ann was a hairdresser, beautician, I guess. Oh, I didn't mention that my brother, my only brother, Jimmy, was killed in the Second World War. He was a member of the Company K National Guard in Centerville when it was activated in early 1941. 10 months or so before Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. As an aside, and we're talking about school, he was a junior, just starting his couple months into his junior year at Stevensville High School. When we moved to Centerville, well, one of his teachers, we called it a shop teacher then, it's a manual arts or whatever now, I guess, in light terminology. Paul Brule lived in Centerville, and he taught in Stevensville, and he hauled Jimmy back and forth to Stevensville, and he graduated from Stevensville.
So you all must have been good students.
Yes.
As well, because you were encouraged to read and have a curiosity.
The same thing happened to me when we moved back from Centerville to Graysonville. Was December of '42. I finished out the year in Centerville by riding my bicycle to Queenstown, catching the bus there.
Wow.
But I had a good stopping point. My Aunt Alice, who I'm sure you're familiar with,
yes,
ran a little store and a big kitchen. So man, I didn't go by, not in the morning so much, but in the afternoon. I didn't miss many snacks.
Scheduled stop. Right. So how'd you end up going to Kent Island High School?
That was where Graysonville went to Kent.
So once you moved back to Graysonville, you finished out the year, and then
just the
gotcha.
just the year.
What was your graduating class? Of high
1945.
1945.
14 of us.
And how many guys? How many
There
were?
were 6 boys and 8 girls.
So that's a pretty even ratio.
But well, when you think I don't know what the the demographics
Sure.
were at that time, but there were, it was not uncommon for boys not to go to high school.
Right. They went to work.
A good many of them finished elementary school and went to work.
Right.
Now, again, in my, I didn't see a lot of people. Well, I'm saying a lot. There were people that I didn't see that I saw in elementary school.
Right.
Same thing on Kent Island. The boys worked on the farms.
Right.
And it wasn't uncommon in the fall of the year for a boy to miss a couple days of school a week,
Sure.
harvest time. But that was the economics of the situation that was expected.
But your parents encouraged you all to go to school,
yeah,
to finish
yeah.
school.
Oh yeah. Back to Graysonville a little bit. In those days, there was, and I could probably count 7 or 8 grocery stores. Now, some of them were a little more than, well, not as much of a store as a 7-Eleven is now.
Right.
And other of them were fairly sizable. Other 7 or 8 at any given time. Maybe 3 might sell meat, have a meat case, 3 or 4 maybe, meat and milk and that kind of
And
stuff.
there certainly weren't as many prepackaged
Oh, no.
things.
No. Graysonville had two Methodist churches in those days, an Adventist church, Church of God, I think was the proper title for that, which was,
Your mom was Catholic.
my mother was Catholic.
Your dad was Methodist.
He was raised a Methodist. He wasn't a practicing churchgoer.
Were you all raised in the church?
No, what little church going that I did was in the Methodist church, and that was, well, when we lived in Centerville, I went to Sunday school.
Right.
Because some of my buddies
Sure.
went, and there's no problem there.
Right.
When I came back to Graysonville, I went to Sunday school again. I was never, I didn't go to church service all that
Right.
time. Now, my father's family, the girls were raised Methodist. With some it was took pretty well. With others it didn't take so well. The interesting thing about it is, I say there were 2 Methodist churches, Methodist Episcopal and Methodist Protestant, which joined, I guess, when they merged.
The United Methodist.
United Methodist now. But one of my aunts went to MP Church and one went to the ME. Now, they always told me that was because my grandparents, my grandfather belonged to one and my grandmother belonged to, they're both Methodists, but they belonged to different churches.
Wow.
So
one of the girls went to this one, one of the girls.
So I do know that part is true. I
Right.
can remember that. I know where it was. And of course there were some, I don't want to be politically incorrect here, but there were colored churches and a colored elementary school. Of course we had an elementary school in Graysonville, 4-room, no plumbing, no indoor plumbing, no outdoor outdoor plumbing was an outhouse and a well.
Right.
And 3 teachers, which
For
7 grades.
7 grades.
Yeah, 1 and 2 in one room. We didn't have any kindergarten, of course, in those days. 3 and 4, and I guess 5, 6, and 7 were together. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, but we all went to Stevensville High School, and of course they had bus service then. But not too long before that, Like Aunt Carolyn, who graduated from Stevensville High School in 1918, rode to Stevensville on the train to go to high school, as did any number of other people
Sure.
in Graysonville at that time. If you wanted to go to high school, that's the way you went. And also, as an aside, when I went to high school, we had 5 high schools in Queen Anne's County, Stevensville being one, Centerville, Sudlersville, Churchill, and one in Queen Anne called Tri-County, which served that corner of
Sure.
Talbot, Caroline, and Queen Anne County. There was only one colored. I know it's politically correct to say African American, but I grew up, it was colored.
Right.
I don't say that in any disparaging way.
That's just the terminology that was
right.
typical
But
for the era.
There was one school in Centerville, and I guess if you lived on Kent Island and were black, you wanted to go to high school, you had to ride a bus to Centerville.
To get to Kennard.
Yeah, to Kennard. And I can imagine, not many of them did it. I don't know.
They have recently started a Kennard Alumni Association, and they applied for grants. They're renovating the building.
Oh, are they?
And they're going to have a cultural museum, a workplace where people can go and hands-on learn about that era.
That's, yeah, they were. Oh, come in.
We blocked her out.
Wait a minute.
Well, we got rid of these dancing girls we got in here.
All right.
Anyway,
Listen for a minute. Just to say.
They just went out the window.
They went out the window. They always do that. They're good at hiding them.
the schools, of course, there was a sort of a spurge in school building. I would say maybe in the early 30s. I think that's when Stevensville was built, the high school that I went to. There had been a high school there, but in another part of town. It later turned into an elementary school and then an antique shop
Right.
down at Benton's Crossing.
But that's the school that you graduated from.
I graduated. The school I graduated from was a brick school.
The
It's no longer.
mod, the right.
It's where the site of the. I guess it's an intermediate school.
Right.
Something there. I
A
don't
middle
know,
school.
Middle school or something. Yeah, whatever they.
And that building was raised after the high schools were consolidated.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early '60s,
Right.
mid-'60s, I guess. But they built schools in Centerville and Churchill and Sudlersville, I guess. The Tri-County one was an old building. It went before that. That didn't last. Well, I guess it lasted up until the desegregation came in and consolidated them all into what's now Queen Anne's High School or whatever they call it, something like that.
I've had an opportunity to interview Dr. Rhodes a couple times, and that was a real interesting process, the desegregation and the consolidation.
Well, my sister Carolyn was on the school board at that time for several years and participated in that.
She kind of followed in your dad's footsteps a little bit politically. She never really ran for office,
Yeah,
but
she ran one time.
did
But
she?
she didn't.
But she was very involved with a lot of committees and.
Yeah. Well, so was my sister Mary Ann.
Is that
Mary
right?
Ann was more of a party animal than.
That I think Carolyn was.
Carolyn was a little more serious.
And certainly her namesake was a serious lady too. Aunt Carolyn was a serious woman.
And something else I was going to say. The getting back to Kent Island, there were places that you talk about stores. You needed wallpaper or something like that. Tom Price ran a store in Dominion. I can't think of his wife's name, but wallpaper that always comes to mind. Down there, and dress material and that kind of stuff. You could get.
So different stores carry different types
well,
of.
but there was some hardware stores. Well, several of the stores in Graysonville had a bit of hardware, paint, that kind of stuff. Something a boat owner would need: bolts, nails, rope, that kind of stuff.
Chain,
yeah, and that was what some of the things that you went in, but there were, as far as medical, there were 2 doctors on Kent Island in the 30s and early 40s, Dr. Saddlemeyer and Dr. Snyder. One doctor in Queenstown, Dr. Price, who after he died, Dr. Lowe, who was a Kent Island boy, Kent Island High School graduate, as a matter of fact, Stephenville High School graduate. Went through medical school, he came back. He was unfortunately killed very early in life in an automobile accident.
Who was your family doctor? Which one of them?
Dr. Price delivered me, and I'm sure would have been considered my family doctor. Of course, my father, having been a wounded veteran, Veterans Affairs or whatever, took care of a lot of his. When we moved to Centerville, Dr. Rodney Layton was there. He had been considered, but you didn't go to the doctor very often, unless you really had to.
Home remedies and.
Right. If you, as I say, there was a drugstore in Queenstown. Dr. Hitch ran the drugstore. I don't believe there was one on Kent Island. Use the word hospital, you automatically meant Easton Hospital. If you never heard of an ambulance until after World War II.
Sure.
That was goes without saying that was the returning of the whole generation was fighting that war. Changed drastically, and I'm sure there was a couple of things that had changed it. One was the GI Bill of Rights, where they got more education, higher education, I'll put it that way. But the other was, I think it was people who had seen the world and saw that there was more than Queen Anne's County in the state of Maryland. Things were different, and they wanted to be different. They wanted houses. They wanted schools. They wanted better churches.
A more modern approach to life. Well, and that's always a good place to wind up too. I always ask about change. Change. You've seen a lot of change here on the shore, and what stands out in your mind as the biggest changes in your lifetime here locally?
I guess you couldn't ignore the fact that the biggest change factor, one of the greatest change factor in Kent Island and Graysonville and the rest of the Eastern Shore is the building of the Bay Bridge. It just so happens that I graduated from Hopkins as a civil engineer in 1949, about the time they started construction. They had been, of course, talking about it and planning it, and I wrote a little term paper, and I hope it's been in the incinerator long over, saying the kind of the idea was write a paper about what you saw as change, and my theory was there's not going to be much change on Kent Island, in Queen Anne's County. The big change is going to be in Ocean City with people wanting to go to Ocean, which is entirely true. No, entirely not true. The biggest change is on Kent Island, obviously. And it started with building Cloverfields and the shopping center, Dave Nichols. Big things and other things. Transportation is a change. I can remember when the road from what is Mattapeake, where the park and where the Marine Police is, down to Ken Point, was dirt. And that was in high school times. Many of the roads, Perry's Corner Road was dirt. they're all paved, and that brings me to, I'm just started reading a book about the road system. Should I terminate?
No, not at all. I'm
Road system
actually grabbing my
in the
camera. I'm gonna take a
country.
couple pictures.
About things, and back in the early 1900s when we're just getting fired up about roads and everything, the big cry was, get the farmers out of the mud. That was the motto. Well, in 1942 or thereabouts, when Daddy was in his I'll say mid stages of his political career, he was a member of the Joe George faction, the so-called New Deal faction, as opposed to the Dudley Rowe faction, which was the old organization faction.
Wow.
And in those days, in one of the elections, I don't know whether it was 42 or 40, I believe it might have been 46, because the war was over. The New Dealers ran on the plank, and their platform was get the farmers out of the mud, get some of these roads paved. So that was, I remember that all. You're talking about politics a little bit earlier. Big thing in those days, in the 30s and the 40s, was you were a Democrat, you were going to get elected to county office. If you're a Republican, you weren't going to get elected to county office. You might get appointed if there's a Republican governor like Governor Nice. In the 1942 election, and I've got a sample, no, it's not a sample ballot, it's an actual ballot from Graysonville, 5th district, 5th election district, whatever precinct it is. I can't remember what the precinct was. But this is in the general election now. The top, like be the governor and congressman, whatever, you had a Democrat and Republican running. And all the county offices, there wasn't a Republican. They didn't put a ticket. The Republican Party didn't put a ticket up. In 1938, when my daddy first started running for office, he ran for sheriff. The Republicans nominated another prominent Coursey from Graysonville named Ray Coursey, who was a Republican. They nominated him for sheriff because they figured that they would get confused with
Vote for
name.
Coursey.
Yeah, he didn't have any trouble. There wasn't enough Republicans to count hardly in Queen Anne's County then, which is entirely different than it is.
Yeah,
now.
even when I came up, I was told not to register as anything but Democrat because you couldn't vote if in the primary.
The big fights were the primaries,
right?
Democratic primary, and I've got several old newspapers my mother saved that I can see the names now. Sid Gadd is a prominent one from Centerville.
Yeah.
Pat Thomas from Chester, who was a prominent merchant there.
Yep.
Can't think of the man's name. It's farmer, and it's Jimmy Ewing's wife, Isabel.
Lowry's.
Yeah, the Lowry, Claude Lowry.
Claude Lowry.
I couldn't think of that. He's very prominent. Tillman Eaton was a very active politician from Chester. There was a Senator Kerwin who was very active. That was a little bit before my,
Have you ever had an opportunity to visit the Kerwin store?
No.
They really have done a nice job down there.
What, is it like a museum?
Yeah, they've reproduced the era.
Oh,
so
okay.
they've stocked the shelves and.
Oh, is it kind of open to the public?
It is. I know it's the first Saturday of every month.
Oh, okay.
And then different times
Yeah.
they have. But yeah, you would enjoy that, I
I'll
think.
find out maybe tonight. Ann Gold.
Linda Kyer, she's married to Butch Kyer. She's the docent there.
Oh, is she?
And so definitely talk to her. She's invested a lot of time and energy in that place.
Now, she was Linda Severa.
Severa, yes, sir.
Yeah, well, her father was one that you were a waterman. he was one that was an engine man. There were several in Graysonville. Mr. Jimmy O'Donnell and his son Sherman. This is Sherman, well, before and after the war. But they had a little shop right on Jackson's Creek. They were engine people. You know, Mr. Jimmy could fix anything from a mantle clock to a.
So there were engine people, and then there were blacksmiths, for worse of or lack of a better term.
We didn't have a blacksmith. I guess there was a blacksmith in Stevensville, and
A lot of times they make oyster the heads.
Yeah. I can't think of his name. Yeah, that's where you got it. Now my cousin Kirby.
Good example.
Took self-taught, and I guess he did a pretty good job. I saw some of the stuff he made.
Right.
And,
he had a shop here in Graysonville.
Yeah, I lost track. See, he didn't start that until after I was gone in the mid-50s. I got married in the mid-50s. And there was a blacksmith in Queenstown, Jim Thompson. Jim. Yeah, I think it was Jim. Thompson at any rate. But, yeah, there was a blacksmith down Dominion, Crab Alley Neck, someplace, I think. Yeah, there were people who
did that.
Yeah,
and there's boat, and then there were boat builders.
Right.
And
The Thomas boys I mentioned a couple of times were a couple of them ran what they call the railway there. It's right next to where the jetty is now. Where they pulled boats out, built boats. They could do work on an engine too. There's no question about that. They had all kinds of skills. That was the only railway that I know of down there. There may have been one down in Dominion, but I'm not sure. But that was where people pulled their boats out.
I guess that's about it. I think my tape's just about done.
Oh, is it?
And but I've never interviewed anybody with such a strong grasp of dates and names. I mean, most people that I talk to really have to dig and really never come up with it most of the time.
Yeah.
I've been amazed listening to you, Jack. It's amazing. You're.
Well, I didn't cover as much because I wasn't as familiar with Kent Island.
Well,
high school,
after an hour or so, you start to get fatigued a little bit. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Okay.
I'd love to sit down and, if you're headed down, call me.
Yeah.
Anytime y'all got something going on. Now that I have my new camera, I'm full steam ahead again.
All right, now, what's this goes to the...
What'll happen is, usually what I do is I write